Peter and Ace's contributions were never as substantial as we made them out to be in the press. The fact of the matter was that two guys, Gene and me, were the engineers and motivators and did 80% of the work. Unfortunately, when we decided to create the help illusion, we never considered the possibility that Peter and Ace would start to actually believe it and that their belief would bite us in the ass. But sure enough, their delusion started to create resentment and eventually fatal fissures in the band. Those fissures first started opening during Destroyer, as Peter struggled to record a song that was ostensibly his own, and we began to have to work around Ace, who spent much of the recording process with his priorities far from where they belonged. He sometimes played his parts with his rings and chains scraping against the fretboard and pickups, and then wanted to quit for the day and take off. When I would ask him to remove the jewelry and do another take because of all the noise, he would say, "Hey,
that's rock and roll."
No, Ace, that's shit.
I'm working on my second book, and this time around, I'm probably not going to be quite as nice as I was to those guys on the first book. I know their deepest, darkest secrets.
After Kiss played a concert in Flint, Michigan in 1975, Peter and I were in a limousine together, and he was trying to sing something he called Beck. I suggested that he change the name to Beth, both because it was a little easier to sing and because it would eliminate any misunderstanding that it was about Jeff Beck. Peter brought this nice little melody into the studio and sang it for Bob. Immediately, Bob sat down and fleshed it out.
I wrote it with a gentleman named Stan Penridge, who passed on in '68. That song was written, and it was about a guy in a band whose wife was always calling us and breaking our chops for him to come home and not practice. And so we got together for literally a joke to write about his wife always calling and breaking up the band, like, you know, I can't come home, we're looking for the sound. But it turned into something more serious as that band Chelsea I was in on Decca Records broke up. And before I know it, you know, we kept doing it, and then it got dormant for quite a few years. I sang it one day to Gene in a car. He liked it. Next thing I know, when we got up to working with Bobby Ezrin, he loved it, and he turned it into a masterpiece.
He had a lot to do with the arrangement, picking out the strings and all, and it actually was a B-side, and winds up being a People's Choice one. I'll take it.
And the rest, I guess, is history.
To get the vocal for Beth, Bob had to record Peter singing the song probably a dozen times and cobble together a single version from the passable parts of those takes. Peter's chances of being able to sing a song off the cuff were about as good as my chances of throwing a penny and hitting the moon.
Well, I think singing's another talent. I got to look at it in songwriting.
It would be a challenge for him to carry a tune in a bucket. Even if we sang a note to him, he couldn't find it. But since we had always presented our Beatles-based fantasy to the world, 4 band members all contributing equally, at some point Peter began to believe his own press. Perception became reality to him, despite the fact that we created the perception ourselves.
It just doesn't, I'm a funny guy. I get up. I'm a real down-to-earth guy. I go to the gym. I hang around. I just don't think of myself in that sort of vein. It freaks me out if I do.
Peter may have contributed a line of lyric or two, but after hearing the original Penridge demo tape of the song, it's clear who came up with the original song. As a side note, Peter was having a hard time getting the vocal performance down. His pitch wasn't to Ezrin's satisfaction. Ezrin made the band leave the studio to give Peter a chance to concentrate. Eventually the track was done, and we all stared at each other. There were no guitars played by the band on it. There were no drums on it, and Ace never showed up to play his part. In a very real way, Beth is simply Peter singing alone. There is not another piece of Kiss on there.
I am an artist, always was, always will be. I'm a New York musician. I hate the word rock star. I don't use it. I don't consider myself one. I consider myself a musician.
Peter had a co-writer on every song he ever wrote because he couldn't really write. Song structure and concepts like making your lyrics rhyme were totally lost on him.
We really didn't know what to do with it. Rock bands didn't do ballads, least of all in the midst of a concerted push for rock and roll credibility. The only way we validated the idea that there were strings on it was because of Yesterday by the Beatles. If it was cool for the Beatles, then we could do it.
I love music, and I was around it all my life. It was always around me. I love all music, all music, not just, I love all music, rock, pop, jazz, everything. And I think being around it and hearing it all the time and it's been a big influence on me. So, it comes through all my stuff.
We had a few days off in LA, and I got together with Karen, the hostess from the Rainbow. I was also now in a position to rent luxury cars for my use, so one of the days in LA, I rented a 2-seater Mercedes and picked Karen up at her apartment to go for a drive up the coast. About 45 minutes on the road, it started to pour. That's when the reality hit me in the face, along with the oncoming rain, that I had no idea how to raise the top. We drove back to her place in the rain with the top still down, never speaking of the obvious. We were both soaking wet when we arrived, and I finally admitted the truth. After a quick laugh together, I got right to the most pressing issue. Do you have a hairdryer I can use?
No. I used to have a teddy bear inside my jacket pocket. And it would have its arms sticking out, right? And I'd walk up to a girl and I'd go, "You want to meet my friend?" And they go, "Okay." And I'd open up my jacket, there'd be a little teddy bear there with his arms hanging out. And they go, "Oh, what a cute little teddy bear." And then we start talking.
In May 1976, we jetted off to England for a 2-month European tour. To me, England represented the musical Holy Land. Everything I loved came from there. But nearly as soon as we landed, I hated it. We had become a big band in the United States. In England and the rest of Europe, we had to prove ourselves all over again. We were back at square one.
We arrived at Heathrow Airport in London and came off the plane in full makeup. The press was all over us, and we drove around to all the sites and had pictures taken for the magazines.
As we had seen back home when we started out, the fans in England were also rabid in their dedication to us. On the other hand, the food was horrible and the transportation archaic. There was no air conditioning, and if you pleaded, they might begrudgingly put one lone ice cube in a drink for you.
British nightlife was just as rewarding as American nightlife. One night we went to the Marquee Club and it was packed. I roamed around the room looking for a new friend or two. I walked up to the bar and asked for a Coke. I never drank and have literally never been drunk in my life. Patti Smith was standing next to the bar. I don't recall saying a word to her. I was more preoccupied by the 2 stunning girls standing at the far end of the room. All of a sudden, Smith turned, slapped me across my face, slurred something, and walked off. To this day, I'm clueless as to what made her do that. But it didn't take me long to walk over to the 2 lovelies, start dancing with both of them on the dance floor, and in short order, take them both back to the hotel. The evening at the hotel began hot and heavy. We were apparently making quite a bit of noise because there was a loud knock on my door. It was Paul. "Didn't I realize," he said, "that it was the middle of the night?
No.
Couldn't I keep the noise down?" I apologized, came back in, and the girls and I moved the bed away from the wall, put the mattress on the floor, and continued on with our business. It was probably 5 in the morning when we all became ravenously hungry. I ordered a feast. It came up in a surprisingly short time. But I had inadvertently given the wrong room number, and the hotel delivered all the food to Paul's room. He was by that time in no mood to joke.
When you're on the road, man, it gets hairy, it gets crazy, and you're so together all the time. I mean, you're just constantly together as the guys. When you get to the hotel and all is said and done, you lock that door. It's wonderful, man. It's like it is another world. You're by yourself if you're with your wife or your girl or whatever, or pets. I don't know if you're into that, but it's a wonderful moment of quietness. And you send up. I love to send up for an old movie and maybe some room service, and it's a magical time.
But the hotel policies represented the biggest sore spot. They made it virtually impossible to take female guests to your room. You had to sign them in, and they had to leave by 10 p.m., and the staff enforced the rules. Trouble taking girls to our rooms was a much bigger problem than the food. I could go without food, but I couldn't go without a steady diet of wild and willing women. That was absolutely essential.
The rest of Europe wasn't quite as fulfilling as England. For starters, the accommodations were different from what we had come to expect. European hotels weren't like American hotels. They were smaller, and the plumbing didn't always work the way it was supposed to work.
Ace bought knives all along the European tour, and on the way home, he taped a bunch of them to the inside of his Marshall cabinets to sneak them into the country. It pissed me off. If they were found, all our gear would be impounded. but it was par for the course for Ace. Once on a domestic flight, our tour manager's bags had been searched and a stolen hotel phone was found. The tour manager hadn't put it in there.
No.
Ace also stashed drugs in the bags or pockets of crew members without their knowledge, so he wasn't on the hook if they were found. Ace was all about Ace, regardless of the cost to anyone else.
Had nothing to do with anything.
Arriving in the middle of the night back at my apartment on 52nd Street after a month in Europe, the doorman stopped me as I walked in with my suitcase. "Can I help you, sir?" "Huh?" "Yeah, very funny. I live here," I said. I kept walking toward the elevator. "Sir, if you don't stop, I'm going to call the police." I was gone a lot.
Fame creates monsters, and I'm not just talking about Ace and Peter. I'm also talking about myself. At around this time in 1977, we hired a new road manager, Frankie Scanlaro. He was on the shorter side and round, and we loved him. He missed his calling in life because he constantly kept all of us laughing. Frankie had been through the rock wars with other bands. He had heard all the drug and booze stories, and he was wise to Ace and Peter. He was also wise to Gene and Paul.
All told, during the first 5 years of the band, we probably went through 20 tour managers. Among the most colorful was Fat Frankie Scanlaro, an old-school manager who had worked with Joey D and the Starlighters. His upbeat nature was contagious. He had a lot of nicknames for us.
These names reached right down to the core of who we were and what each of our personal agendas was.
He called Peter the Ayatollah Criscola.
One of Peter's nicknames, for example, was Peter Long, because he was always complaining. Ace was High Octane because he was frequently tanked.
And I was the he-she because of my preening and dancing on stage.
Because of his androgynous appeal. I was Gene the Nazarene. Frankie thought, rightfully so, that I had an inflated sense of myself and that I thought everyone else was an idiot.
Fat Frankie would do anything to get us laughing, and when he did, tensions within the band faded. He could be really self-deprecating too. He liked to say, "I may have a little dick, but I can make it spin." Some of the tour managers were fired because Bill didn't think they were doing a good job. Most were ousted because of jealousies within the band. Each member wanted the undivided attention of the road manager, or at least a sense of favoritism. When one of us didn't get that, that person not coincidentally began to think the road manager was no good. A lot of them quit too. Even people who had worked with other bands couldn't deal with the growing friction in ours. It was just too trying to have 4 hyperactive, dysfunctional people demanding all your attention and, if they didn't get it, sabotaging you so you fell on your ass.
You